Welcome to Tutoring 56. This video is a video on a project where the students will mix math with art. And it's all based on ratios. So it's a really good art project that's going to combine first intro ratios where students are learning 1 to 2 or 2 to 4 or 3 to 6, that they can see that if it's 1 inch here, it's going to be 2 inches there, or 1 centimeter or 2 centimeters, or 1 mile. And this can be related right into maps, because if you look at a map on the bottom, it'll say that this big is, 2 centimeters is worth 5,000 kilometers. And this helps students to make that connection between point A and point B. The project is one that I've done up on a Halloween theme, but could be used in anything, literally anything. The 3 examples I want to give is we can do it for Halloween with just a nice simple tombstone. So for those students who are struggling with it or are younger and don't have the dexterity, a plain tombstone might work. Or Remembrance on Remembrance Day, and you can connect it not only with math and the art of making the cross, you could also be connecting it to history and finding it, because you're going to make a cross, so it's like a tombstone. That tombstone could represent somebody who they know went to war and didn't make it back. So in my personal family, we could my grandson could connect it to his great uncle Alvin, or Alvin's brother, who was killed in 1916 during World War I. But it would help them, A, math ratios, B, the art part, but also being able to connect it to the history, because they'd have to do the research on that particular individual. Somebody else could do it and make the connection with, say, Sir Johnny MacDonald, and just make a cross in his memory. Or if this is somebody from an indigenous population and they know a child who didn't last survive the residential schools. There's lots of ways they could use this. You could also use it at Easter, because a cross for Easter is very often connected, and you could put spring flowers on it and decorate it that way. There's multiple ways to do it. The example I'm giving, and I'm going to show you my example, is very simple. It's literally just, here's the tombstone. I was doing this up in October, and I just sort of went with the season. It's nice and simple. This would be for somebody, this simplistic design could be for somebody who really struggles with this kind of stuff, but they could still do it while somebody else who is more creatively inclined or has better fine motor control could make their design simpler or more complicated and do little extras on it. Obviously, if you're doing it something for Remembrance Day, we're going to cross it out. Okay, so that's the idea behind this video. This video is going to be broken into several sections. This section with the intro, the next section where I'm going to show you and talk over the step by step. You'll actually see it all typed out. The steps by steps on how you're going to do it. And then I will discuss how, if I was a classroom teacher, how will we be marking this? This is one of these times, because it's pretty way laid out, I wouldn't be creating a rubrics that most of us teachers use. I'd be creating a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 10 and how well did they do the math, how art 1 to 10, how well did you do with the design, was it balanced, etc., etc. But I will show that. And then the third section will just be a review of what we did. Okay, so now the next section is me talking about or discussing the actual project. Okay, so now we're to part 2 of this video on the Tombstone Math/Art project. Now, the first part you're going to see in this written out part section is the educational objectives. The idea is, don't do busy work. I hate it when other teachers do it. I want a purpose behind why I'm doing an activity in my class, or I'm doing an activity one-on-one with my students in the evening. The students also realize that, and they appreciate it more. So let's look at the 5 basic educational objectives we're looking for in this project. Number one, students are able to design a scale model of a tombstone or whatever, and then create the full-size one using styrofoam or foam board. The final project having an area of 2,800 square centimeters. And the ratio between the scale model and the actual is 1:2. Now, you as another teacher or a parent, you can change the area you want. You can make it larger, you can make it smaller. 2,800 square centimeters just comes out to a nice, decent size tombstone. The second educational objective is to show an understanding of area and how we can have the same area in the object even though the dimensions are not the same. So we can have 25 students in our class all making, say, a tombstone, and they're all 2,800 square centimeters, but little Johnny's is 1 centimeter wide and 2,800 centimeters high, and somebody else's might be 100 centimeters wide and 28 centimeters high, but it's still 2,800 centimeters squared. Okay, the third objective is to reinforce the concepts of ratio and how doubling a dimension will not result in actually doubling the area. Okay, sometimes students confuse it. They're figuring if I'm doubling the dimensions, so I'm going from 1 meter by 1 meter to 2 meters by 2 meters, since I've doubled the dimensions, then I should double the area, and it doesn't work that way. This lets them make that connection. Number 4, to create a scale diagram and then physically, literally do the math. So as you're going to see in some pictures following this, you're going to see that I have drawn my scale diagram, but then I've done the math right beside it. That way everything is together, and as they're doing the transfer over to make the actual, the information is right there, and they've got something to look at. They can see what they started with, the math they did, and then the final project. For those using it as a teacher and you want marks, this gives you some source to actually do the marking. And parent or teacher, you can be using this section where they're marking it to make sure they're doing it right and that their final project is going to actually end up double the dimensions. Number 5, use your math skills to figure out the ratio between the area of the scaled model and the finished project. So in this last part, they're going to literally figure out what the area is of their scale diagram and then figure out what the area of their final project is and be able to compare it, see if they can see a ratio difference between the two of them. The next part on this part that I've typed out and you're looking at right now is materials. Per student, they need a sheet of paper. That's an obvious. A sheet of paper where they're going to do their scale diagram, and on that same piece of paper to one side, they're going to do their actual math, so the two of them are together. They will then need a styrofoam or a foam board for the actual project. They'll need black and gray paint. If you're using this idea for something other than Halloween, you may want to add extra colors. So if you decided to do crosses for Easter, then maybe you want to, the students can use lots of colors to put flowers on the top of it, because you're celebrating, if you're Christian and you're celebrating the rise of Christ rising, then you're going to want lots of colors there. If you're doing this for Remembrance Day, you want maybe some red for a poppy at the top hand corner. And because you're very creative little people, are going to want to add extras. Some of your students, that's enough. I've done it. They're not creative that way, and that's fine. That's who they are. But they're going to be able to get the whole idea of the rest of it. Now, the next one is a black permanent marker, medium thickness or thicker, not a fine tip. And that's for if you don't want to use paint to paint in the letters, you can use a black permanent marker. The last one is the paint brushes. Okay, let's go to actually making it. The procedures. Number 1, obviously, get your paper out and draw a scale model. Paper, pencils, rulers, reinforce. They need to take their time to do this carefully and precisely so that they have a really good scale model to follow up. to their larger one. For those of you who are marking it, this is where you can be telling them this is how they're going to get the extra marks. Take your time, use the ruler, make sure everything is very, very precise. Then on their scale model, they are to print the measurements of each side and the spaces between the letters and the spaces between the letters on the top of the tombstone and the bottom of the tombstone and any spacing between the letters. See the example when I show it to you. Number 2, lightly drawing the lines for the spacing of the lettering that you're going to add and any other designs you want to add. This is coming from somebody who is not artistically inclined. Creatively inclined, yes. Artistically, no. Do it lightly so that they can get that extra fallback in case it doesn't turn out the way they want it. They can easily erase it. Okay? Number 3, lightly sketch in the lettering. So you lightly sketched in the lines where you're going to draw your letters, but now lightly sketch in the lettering and any designs. Remember, these letterings also have to follow the same ratio. Number 4, do all the math on the paper beside the scale diagram so that you can see the math beside the scale diagram. So as you as a student or somebody doing this project can look at what you wanted it to look like, you can make sure your math is right, and this can help you work over to make the final product. Include all your math there. Number 5, once you are happy with the plans, and only when you're happy with the plans, kids, you can start lightly transferring it onto the phone. My suggestion to every student is get a buddy to double check your math. Get the teacher to double check your math. Kids at home, make sure get mom or dad to double check your math. You want this to turn out the way you envisioned it. Okay, so number 5 has multiple parts, as we can see. Number 1, part A for number 5 is first with a thick pencil draw the outside shape and then very carefully cut out the actual foam using the X-Acto knife. Scissors will not work with foam board or styrofoam. It has to be an X-Acto knife. Now, this is where the adult in the situation has to make some judgment calls. Are your students capable enough and have the fine dexterity enough to use an X-Acto knife? Now, my grade 8s did use X-Acto knives all the time, but I started the year with a lesson on X-Acto knives, and one of my kids started to misuse the X-Acto knife. He lost the privilege for 2 weeks because he can hurt people with it. He very quickly learned. He was just fooling around. Doesn't matter. It's an X-Acto knife and it's sharp. So please make sure that is a safety issue, that you're comfortable with the students using the X-Acto knife. Once you have cut out the outside shape, as in B, it says lightly trace your placement lines and make them really, really light so you can easily erase them afterwards. Number C, draw in your letters and designs following the ratios. Don't suddenly decide you're going to change the shape. Number D, once you are happy with your letters/design, take the edge of a child's scissors to trace the letter/design. And you want to take that very dull edge of the child's scissors and push it into the styrofoam. You really want to make a dent, not just a little dent, but right into the foam board. You want to make a solid dent for the outline of everything. Okay, so then you get to E. This is why. You're going to use either the marker or black paint to very carefully color in the letters and the designs. And if you haven't made the dent big enough, you're not going to get that textured look we see on old cemeteries. You're going to get a very flat look. This is why you want to make it deep, is so that the paint will soak into the foam board or the styrofoam and give it that more textured look. F, once the black paint is dry. So if you're in a classroom, this would be a really nice thing to finish off before recess and let everything lay out during recess while it dries and come back after recess to do the painting, the next step, painting. All right, it does take about 10 or 15 minutes before I'm really comfortable with the paint being dry. Once that black paint is dry, Then you're going to take the gray or the silver paint. I went with gray. And you're going to paint the whole thing, top to bottom. We're not looking for a really level, smooth coloring of the gray, because those textured lines will give your final product more texture. So this will help keep it looking a little more like old stone. That's why we want the light streaks. Note here, the example you've seen is using foam board. Styrofoam, which is that kind that's really bumpy, we use it for insulating inside the house, and breaks apart really, really easy and leaves all those little crumbly bits around, would make the project look even more like stone. It would give it more texture. I found it hard to find. All right. And if you're a classroom teacher with this idea, there's the extra problem of expense. It's easier to go into your local dollar store and get great big sheets of foam board and cut them in the appropriate sizes for the kids. Styrofoam is a whole lot more expensive. All right. Styrofoam can be found, at least in Southern Ontario, at hardware stores, building supply places, stationery stores. I just found that when I was looking for it, it was expensive. Okay, that should take us to that whole page. On the bottom, there's some extras here, and it's things I've mentioned. While this project and the example I've given is Halloween oriented, we do realize that not everybody celebrates Halloween, but it can be easily used for Remembrance Day or Easter by making crosses and just changing the designs that you're going to add around the extra. That's where you could be adding extra color. With Remembrance Day, the students could easily research a veteran in their family or country and create the cross in the memory of them, making sure that the dates are correct. So now you've connected, you've brought in history. So in the example of my family, if my grandson was to do this, he could easily be researching my mother's uncle who died during World War I, 1916 to be specific, and he could look up Alvin Coffin and find out the date Alvin Coffin was born and where he died and what day he died. Okay, so that would just bring in a little bit of history for those people who might be wanting to bring in that family history, or if you're thinking about doing this for a high school student, that's that extra connection. I might even use it for my grade 7 and 8s, only to make them realize that history is this continuous thing. Marking is really, really easy. If you're marking, just create a scale of 1 to 10. This is not a project I would use rubrics with. I tend to avoid rubrics for arts because not all of us are artistically inclined. So as long as they've done the things I'm looking for, that's where I mark on art projects. So the scale is 1 to 10. In math, you want to be marking 1 to 10 on the scale. 1 would be the actual math. Did they do the math right? Did they do all their calculations right? And is the final area going to be 2,800 centimeters? And the second scale you could use for math is a 1 in 10, and how accurate is the increase from the design to the final project, and is the final project 2,800 centimeters? So did they actually start with the scale diagram and everything got honestly moved over and is increased by, in dimensions, by 2? Okay, and that would be taking a little extra care for looking at the lettering and the design. Or did they go, okay, this is where I want the poppy, and they freehand it and they didn't really make it a direct increase ratio from the sample, the sketch, to the final product. And art, I'm a softie when it comes to marking art. Scale of 1 to 10 for balance of design. Does it look good when you look at it? Is it balanced, or did they put everything on one side and so it sort of looks lopsided? Okay. Scale of 1 to 10 for neatness, and how much care did they take? Reason I do this for the art projects is, like I said, some of us are not artistically inclined, and I don't want to nail students just because they don't have the artistic tendencies. But if I can get them to take their time to balance things and take their time to be neat and tidy, then one of those aims in art is, for me, is being accomplished. Okay, so that's it for the actual written out part. The next part we'll just look at, you'll see the different pictures. Okay, welcome back to part 3 on this video on the cross-curriculum math/art project, where we're combining art and ratios and area. Okay, now we spent a very long time of me literally just verbally reading this out to you and explaining why the different parts are there and different alternatives and little extras like on the second page. So instead of just showing you pictures like that and talking over top of them, I just thought maybe instead I would physically just do it this way and show you what it's going to look like. So I mentioned when I was reading out the instructions how the students should have everything on one piece of paper. So literally it's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. They have on one side drawn the scale diagram, and in my messages that I said they needed to write in the measurements for the scale diagram. So like I have that this is 10.5 centimeters across the top, and down here I have how tall it is. Okay, so there's the scale diagram on this side. On this side, in nice T-charts using rulers, okay, we have the 3 columns. 1, the measurements of the scale diagram. 2, the factor that we are multiplying it by to get the final project sizing. Okay, so that's all there. And my reason behind is now as they're doing it and they're transferring it on to the other one, it's all right there. For those of you who are teachers and need to mark this, it's all right there, and you haven't got 15 pieces of paper. It's all right there. It's easier for you to mark. It's also easier for the students because they can see their scale diagram versus their math. Okay, it's all in one spot. Now, this is what I was talking about. And I realize you can't see the measurements. It's just, I just figured I had enough of just reading out the instructions. So the final project, if this one, like I said, is for Halloween, it's going to look something like this. Now, I will concede, mine is very simplistic. I didn't add any bells and whistles. I don't add bells and whistles intentionally because I'm not artistically inclined. Creatively inclined, yes. Artistically inclined, no. Okay? It makes it nice and simple. I'm also creating these projects and these cross-curriculum things all the time. I don't have 40 hours a day to make a really nice looking one. And now the silver lining to that is you will have students who are not artistically inclined. That's okay. And if I always made one that had lots of bells and whistles, like some of my art teacher friends would do, they always feel like they can't reach that. I can never be that good. I can't make mine look like that. And so inadvertently, they are made to feel I can't do that well. So if I make mine nice and simple, they're going, okay, I could do that. That's really simplistic. I can do that. And then of course, as they get going and their little creative juices start coming, they start coming up with other things. Okay? So if it's a Halloween thing, we may end up with somebody going, well, I can't draw very well, but I could put my fingers like here and trace my fingers on there. Okay? It's little things like that. If it's a Remembrance Day and they honestly can't draw Poppy for love nor money, they could just get a Poppy and put it on there, but that would add that extra dimension. Just they gotta also add it to their scale diagram. All right. If it's Easter, the same thing. They could be drawing on simple flowers. Most kids can draw a daisy. Like that's not too difficult a flower to add. So that's one of the reasons. It's a silver lining. It's not really why I started making things simple. I make things simple because A, I'm not artistically inclined, and B, I create like 10 or 12 of these a year. So I just don't have 45 hours a day to be making them nicely. Okay, so that's what the final project should look like in one way, shape, or form. Next, I have mentioned before about the styrofoam. This is the styrofoam I'm talking about. This is just a piece of the siding insulation out of my house from the past summer. You can see what it looks like. That's what I'm talking about. If your students are going to do that, if you look at the foam board, they really don't need to be painting the edges, but you can see that if they did this one, that it would be to their advantage to paint that top piece. When they're doing it, they may say, oh, I'm going to add a piece of black around there. This is where their creative juices will start to come. Even the ones that don't really like art, except for that it's an easier period than, say, English or math. That's where they're going to come. Okay, so there you go. That's one of them. That's the project. That's the whole thing. Now, if you have a student who really, really struggles with this, starting with the scale diagram and moving it up to this, or they just introduced the concept, what you can do is start with this, at least the outside edges, so you just like the outside edges, to make sure it's that 2,800 centimeters squared. Then, instead of multiplying, they're going to divide it to bring it down to the scale size. Then they can draw the scale size, put in all the details they want to add, and then do the opposite operation and multiply it and bring it up so that the details are going to be the right size there. Okay, so that's just, some students have no problems going from here to this, starting with the scale and bringing it up. But those are the kids that are really good at math and they're thinking in their brain, I want 2,800 square feet. I want these dimensions on that, so I'm going to bring it down to there. They're doing it all in their mind without a problem. And that's great. That's fine. Some students need that more concrete step. So starting off with the big one and then bringing it down to the little one may be an easier step, especially at the beginning when they're first learning how to do ratios, right? But having said that, only let them get the outside dimensions. If you're going to go from big to little, only allow them to get the outside dimensions of the big one to downsize it to the little one. Then say, forget that. Now you have to create the designs and the lettering inside on the scale one and then multiply it up to get the big one. Doing those, that would really reinforce the connection there is between a 1-to-2 ratio or whatever. Okay. Now, in closing, I created this project to say 1-to-2. Nice, easy numbers. It's not a big problem. If you want to make it different and change it to 1-to-3 or 2-to-3, that's fine. Or whatever ratio you want. The only catch is the bigger you make it, the bigger the ratio, like 1-to-2 goes to this, but if you've got 1-to-3, that's suddenly a whole lot bigger. Instead of 1 centimeter, it's now 3 centimeters. So the 1-to-2 is a nice easy for the little ones, like the grade 6 and 7s that are only first starting with ratios. That works really nice. Okay, there you go. I hope you enjoy the project. Let me know in the comments what you think. Is there other tweaks that you would like to see added to it? Any other ideas? Any other cross-curriculum things you want to see, especially when it comes between math and something else, because math is one of the subjects that kids instinctively hate or don't like. They either love it or they hate it. And making it real life gives them that hands-on mentality where they can see how this is going to work. Anyways, hope you enjoy.